even though the world seems mapped and measured down to every last corner. Earth still manages to hide villages that are almost impossible to find. Isolation doesn't just fail to make them disappear. It actually creates worlds beyond our imagination. Some tribes live way off the beaten path. Other communities hide behind seas of clouds, freezing ice, and oceans that are never truly calm. Somehow, almost inexplicably, life just keeps going day after day. They build houses on rocks, farm on steep mountain slopes, and go about their daily lives in places where being isolated isn't the exception, but a part of existence. And maybe nowhere shows this clearer than the Faroe Islands, where a tiny village exists right where it feels like it shouldn't. This is the little village of Gásadalur, hanging precariously on cliffs facing the North Atlantic. From afar, a few roofs scattered across the green plateau look like a handful of houses thrown against the wind. Less than 10 families live on that lonely patch of land. Right at the edge of the village, Monemvasia waterfall plunges off the cliff straight into the churning sea below. To set foot in Gásadalur, you have to brave a steep mountain road swallowed by fog and gusty winds. The other option is betting on a boat ride across waters that rarely stay calm. The village is so isolated that sheep outnumber people many times over. They casually graze right on the edge of the drop, as if the hundreds of meters of empty space below are just an extension of the pasture. In other places, people have figured out how to turn isolation into a totally different way of life. Deep at the bottom of Havasu Canyon, among the giant red cliffs of the Grand Canyon, Supai appears like a strip of life hidden away from the world. This is home to the Havasupai, an indigenous community that has been tied to this canyon for generations. They live off the blue waters flowing from limestone layers in the middle of the dry desert. Not a single car road leads to the village. You can only get there by hiking, riding a mule, or taking a helicopter. Even food and medicine have to make the final leg of the trip on the backs of mules. As the camera pans down past a sea of red rocks, tiny roofs finally start to show up amid a strip of green trees. Even though it's remote, the village still has a school, a church, a post office, a cafe, a grocery store, and a lodge. Half a world away, another village hides behind deep forests and layers of clouds. Up in the Flores Mountains of Indonesia, at over 1,000 meters high, Wae Rebo sits tucked away in the rainforest. The road for vehicles ends at Denga. To get here, you have to keep hiking for hours across damp, steep slopes under a forest canopy so thick that sunlight only slips through in thin streaks. Then the forest suddenly opens up, revealing cone-shaped Mbaru Niang houses standing in a circle in the middle of a green valley, like remnants of a world forgotten by time. Beneath those towering thatched roofs, multiple generations still live together. Strangers coming here have to join the Wailu'u ceremony before being allowed into the village. Wae Rebo isn't just isolated by its terrain. It's also like a world with its own door, where people seemingly shouldn't be able to live, but have still survived for generations. Over on Mawsynram Island, an icy sea opens up a breathtakingly beautiful world in the freezing cold. Above the Arctic Circle, rain sits quietly amid the cold sea and mountains that shoot straight up from the water. Only about 300 people live on small patches of land scattered across the fjord, connected by bridges and narrow roads. Against the white snow, red Rawbu cabins huddle close to the harbour, looking like little sparks left over in the middle of a northern winter. They used to be shelters for fishermen during the cod season, when the sea was both an isolating wall and the lifeline of the whole community. On one side is the freezing Vestfjord. On the other side is Reine Fjord, where low clouds glide past the cliffs. Winter sunlight only touches the rooftops here for a few short hours. Even though the E10 road has connected Reine to the outside world, this place still carries the quietness of a land forgotten by time. And maybe that's why Reine has become an iconic image featured on countless postcards of the North. Way down south, another community chose a weirder way to adapt, carving their whole life into the rock. Amid the Sahand Mountains in northwest Iran, Kandovan looks like a giant petrified beehive halfway up a mountainside. Hundreds of cone-shaped volcanic rocks are crammed into the valley, silent like ancient creatures frozen in time. Inside that volcanic shell, spaces have been hollowed out of the rock, connecting into a quiet living world deep inside the mountain. Bedrooms, storage rooms, kitchens, and even livestock pens are buried deep in the rock. The thick walls keep things cool in the summer and hold in the heat when winter sweeps down the valley. From a distance, Kandovan practically blends into the terrain as if the village wasn't built, but just grew out of the rocks. But land isn't always required for a community to exist. In Thailand's Phang Nga Bay, the entire village of Koh Panyi floats on the water. Hundreds of roofs are crammed together out at sea, creating a world that feels impossible to exist. Over 2 centuries ago, Muslim fishermen found their way here, but there was hardly any land to build on. So, they drove thousands of wooden stilts into the seabed, turning the water's surface into a foundation for an entire community. On top of those stilts, houses, a school, shops, and a mosque slowly popped up right above the tide. There are no roads connecting to the village. Every trip starts with a boat. And without even a patch of dirt to play soccer, the kids here piece together old wooden boards to make a pitch right in the middle of the sea. Looking down from above, Koh Panyi looks like a piece of a city floating at the foot of a mountain, detached from the mainland but still buzzing with life through generations. Over in China, though, people didn't anchor their roofs on the sea. They hung an entire village on a cliff, where every step faces a deep abyss. Deep in the Liangshan mountains of Sichuan, Atulie'er hangs onto a cliff nearly 800 meters high. Down below is a seemingly bottomless valley. The only road connecting to the rest of the world is 17 rattan ladders clinging to a nearly vertical rock face. To leave the village, locals have to navigate these ladders suspended over the abyss. Since they can't commute every day, a lot of kids have to board down in the valley and only climb back up during holidays. Later on, the rattan ladders were replaced with steel ones, but the sheer drop below hasn't changed. By 2020, most of the residents moved away, leaving Atulie'er behind on the cliff, like the remains of a world that shouldn't have been able to exist. Over in Georgia, winter can seal off a medieval world under white snow. When the freezing cold sweeps down the Caucasus Mountains, Ushguli practically disappears into the valley at the foot of Mount Shkara. Five little clusters of villages huddle together in a sea of snow. Ancient Svan stone towers poke out of the snow layer like ruins of a world that time forgot. Snow buries all the pathways, locking Ushguli away from the rest of the world. But during the coldest months, life goes on behind thick stone walls. They keep fires burning indoors. Out in the yard, herds of livestock slowly push their way through tall snowbanks. And snow here isn't just something to fight against. On the white slopes around the village, ski tracks stretch out as if people have learned to live with winter instead of just waiting for it to pass. While Ushguli has to battle through white snow and rocks, a place in Italy reveals a totally opposite extreme. On the Ligurian coast of Italy, Vernazza stands out like a bright splash of colour, squeezed between cliffs and the Mediterranean Sea. Centuries ago, high mountains isolated Cinque Terre from the outside world. The people of Vernazza built their houses around a small harbour and then spread the village up the steep slope. There are no flat plains to expand onto. Yellow, orange and red houses are stacked on top of one another, linked by narrow alleys and steep stairs. Right at the harbour's edge, the church of Santa Margherita di Antioquia stands on a rocky outcrop pointing straight out to sea. An octagonal bell tower rises up among the colourful roofs, like an anchor keeping Vernazza from sliding down. For centuries, the bells ringing here have mingled with the sound of the waves, becoming the spiritual heartbeat of this tiny community. Standing here, there is barely any land left in front of you, just the open sea right after the stone steps. Nowadays, the railway has broken through most of that isolation, but looking from offshore, Vernazza still feels like its own world, where a whole community clings to a mountainside just one long slide away from the sea. Leaving the brightness of Vernazza behind, the next stop on our trip will pull you into the gloomy skies of Mawsynram. Mawsynram exists under a sky that never seems to stop pouring rain. So every year, over 11 meters of rain falls on this village. It turns mountainsides into waterfalls, roads into mud, and roofs into blurry shadows behind a white mist. Some days, the amount of water dropping in just 24 hours beats out an entire year of rain for many cities. Amid the non-stop sound of heavy rain, the Khasi people throw bamboo nups on their backs and keep working. Just like their ancestors have done for generations. In Mawsynram, rain is no longer just weather, it's what shapes every road, every house, and the whole pace of life. But over in Bonifacio, nature pushes the harshness right to the edge of the cliff. The old town of Bonifacio is built on a white limestone cliff, almost 75 meters high in Corsica. Rows of houses huddle so close to the steep drop that it feels like taking just one more step will send you falling straight into the sea. Viewed from the water, the stone walls and cliffs blend together, making the whole city look like it grew right out of the rock. For centuries, the sea and sheer cliffs turned Bonifacio into a fortress, nearly cut off from the rest of Corsica. The only way down is carved into 187 steps right inside the cliff. When you stand on the edge of the old town, hearing the wind howl through ancient walls, Bonifacio doesn't feel like a place people would choose to live. It feels like a city that shouldn't exist, but it has held tight to the sea cliffs for generations. However, in some places, steep mountain terrain poses a different survival challenge. Up in the Ifugao Mountains, the houses in Batad huddle together at the bottom of a giant valley of rice terraces. From the highest point in the valley, Batad looks like a living map made out of dirt, water, and roofs. The residential area isn't laid out in city streets, but is broken up among countless tiers of rice paddies winding around the mountainside. Around here, front doors don't open onto main roads. They open right onto stone steps, paddy edges, and paths barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze past. Vehicles stop on the outside, and every bag of rice, building material, or basic necessity has to be carried down by human strength. High above, water from the forest keeps flowing through each terrace level, trickling past houses before spilling into the valley floor. When the evening light fades from the valley, the roofs in Batad light up one by one, marking another day gone by amid the layers of rice terraces. Meanwhile, on the east coast of Greenland, the icy isolation isn't a boundary anymore. It's become the steady rhythm of daily life. Ittoqqortoormiit pops up as a cluster of colourful houses abandoned between white snow and an endless sea of ice. Over 300 people live here, in a settlement with no roads connecting it to any other community. To set foot in this place, you have to fly into a remote airport, then travel another 40 kilometers by helicopter, boat, or snowmobile. But in Ittoqqortoormiit, isolation isn't some crazy event. It's everyday life. In summer, the sea opens a path for small boats. In winter, the frozen water turns into a road for dog sleds. Only a few supply ships come by each year, bringing food, fuel, and things the outside world considers totally normal. Amid the long periods of darkness, blizzards, and polar bear tracks, windows still light up every night. It's like proof that people can still live in a place that seemingly shouldn't exist. What would it be like if your entire village just sat on a narrow strip of rock between two cliffs? Over in the volcanic region of La Garrocha, Castellfollit de la Roca sits on a basalt cliff over 50 meters high. That rocky outcrop was formed by ancient lava flows. After thousands of years being eroded by water, all that's left now is a narrow strip of land with sides that are almost entirely vertical. Up top, rooftops, narrow streets, and the San Salvador bell tower stretch out right up to the edge. The whole village looks like it's holding on to the very end of a petrified lava flow. Looking up from the valley, the foundation practically vanishes into the basalt columns. That makes Castellfollit look less like a place that was built and more like a village that sprouted straight from the cliff. But deep in the New Guinea jungle, people don't cling to cliffs to survive. They just leave the ground entirely. To protect the tribe from floods, wild animals, and hostile tribes, the Korowai people moved their entire lives up into the forest canopy in southeastern New Guinea. Houses made of wood, sago leaves, and rattan are built anywhere from 8 to 12 meters off the ground. They latch onto large tree trunks like floating fortresses deep in the woods. Down below is a dark, damp world where every footstep might stir up something hiding in the shadows. From the ground, the leafy roofs pretty much disappear into the forest canopy. Only when a thin wisp of smoke drifts up do you realize that in a place seemingly unfit for humans, an entire community is surviving right above your head. Leaving the deep jungle, the journey takes us to a city that doesn't hide under tree canopies but disappears behind an entire mountain, out at sea. From the mainland, nobody can see the tiled roofs, churches, or city walls of Monemvasia. All that's in front of you is a massive chunk of rock. Standing in the sea, cold and showing virtually no signs of life. To get inside, you have to cross a narrow road over the sea, then pass through the single gate carved deep at the foot of the cliff. And only when that gate opens up does an entire medieval world from the Byzantine era suddenly appear. Stone houses are packed tightly on a small strip of land between the sea and the mountain. Narrow alleys weave deep under the shadow of the cliff. The gigantic wall above becomes a natural defensive barrier. Whenever sea fog rolls over the cliff, the whole city slowly fades away. leaving only tiled roofs suspended between rock and water. Then all the tension slowly melts away, making room for a world drifting silently above the clouds. Sitting at an altitude of about 1,650 meters, Mürren shows up like a forgotten village amid the clouds of the Alps. Wooden chalets have clung to the mountainside for generations. Facing the village are the snow-covered peaks of the Eiger, Munk and Jungfrau. There aren't any car roads leading straight up here. All vehicles have to stop at the bottom of the valley, and the rest of the trip can only be done by mountain train or a cable car shooting up through thin air. When clouds spill over the cliffs, Mürren virtually vanishes from the world below. The little pathways fall silent with no engine noise, just the sound of cowbells echoing across the meadows and windows lighting up in the fog. But down in Nueva Venecia, the whole village stands silently over the water. Hundreds of wooden houses are propped up on deep stilts in the swamps of Ciénaga Grande de Santa Marta. The only ways around are small waterways weaving between the houses. Around here, boats take the place of walking. Kids paddle boats to get to school. Fishermen quietly toss their nets into the lagoon, bringing in the livelihood for their entire families. As for clean water, food and building materials, they all have to cross the lagoon to reach each family. Here the water is both a road and a lifeline, but it's also a wall keeping the whole community in an almost completely closed-off world. When evening falls, the noise of boat engines slowly fades, leaving only houses reflecting any water. That sight makes Nueva Venecia look like a village quietly drifting on the edge of the world. Leaving the floating roofs of Nueva Venecia, the journey continues to a place where faith has turned untouchable cliffs into homes. In the middle of the Thessaly Plains in Greece, giant stone pillars shoot up over 400 meters out of the ground. They lift the monasteries of Meteora into the clouds like fortresses of faith. Since the 11th century, hermits sought out the rocky caves here to separate themselves from the world, and eventually built 24 monasteries on rocky peaks that are practically impossible to reach. For centuries, supplies, food, and even people had to be pulled straight up by ropes. Nowadays, stairs have been carved into the mountains, but when mist blankets the valley, Meteora still appears like a sacred world hanging in the sky. It looks like a place where humans couldn't possibly survive, yet they still come to pray and live there through generations. But there is a place where isolation doesn't stretch up into the sky, but closes into a circle right in the middle of the ocean. This is Aogashima, where a whole village sits nestled inside two interlocking volcano craters. Tiny roofs are scattered around the island's slopes. But behind that almost surreal beauty lies a deeply haunting disaster. In 1785, an eruption claimed many lives. That tragedy forced the survivors to leave the island, leaving the place abandoned for over half a century. Today, only a little over 150 people still live here. They live cut off from the mainland by rough seas, cliffs, and ferry trips that can get cancelled at any moment. They use the actual heat from under the volcano to steam their food, make salt, and keep their lives going. Longyearbyen appears like a cluster of colourful houses forgotten among barren mountains, sea ice, and Arctic darkness. The town sits at 78 degrees north, where the sun does not rise for weeks during winter, while summer daylight continues throughout the night. No roads connect this place with the other settlements on Svalbard. Life once revolved around coal mines carved deep into the mountainsides, before Longyearbyen gradually shifted towards scientific research and polar tourism. Beyond the edge of town lies a world of polar bears, blizzards, and an almost endless expanse of white. A modern community still survives here. But one glance out the window is enough to understand that this is life near the very edge of the map. Ittoqqortoormiit was not destroyed by war or natural disaster. On the steep slopes of Shengshan Island, more than 500 houses once sheltered over 2,000 fishermen and their families. But transporting food, reaching schools, and maintaining connections with the mainland proved too difficult. By the mid-1990s, most residents had left. Vines then spread across tiled roofs, crept through windows and covered the narrow lanes, descending toward the sea. Today, Hutuan looks like a place erased from the human world, although a few people have returned to serve visitors. Isolation did not freeze this village in time. It allowed nature to slowly reclaim every wall. Parotaksang is not technically a village, but a secluded monastery complex that appears to have been attached directly to the cliff. Its white temple roofs sit at an elevation of roughly 10,240 feet, nearly 3,000 feet above the Paro Valley. No road leads vehicles to its entrance. Pilgrims must hike through pine forests, follow the mountainside, and climb stone steps beside a waterfall. The present complex was built in 1692 at a site associated with the legend of Guru Rinpoche meditating inside a mountain cave. Between the clouds and the abyss, the bells of Takseng seem detached from every rhythm of life below. This place leaves visitors wondering why people chose an almost unreachable cliff on which to build one of their most sacred sanctuaries. Lamayuru lies within a landscape eroded by wind and time into pale golden hills, wrinkled like the surface of a barren planet. The terrain surrounding the village was formed from sediments left behind by an ancient lake that disappeared, earning the area the name Moonland. Yet within this nearly lifeless landscape, earthen houses still cling to the mountainside. Above them stands the ancient Lamayuru Monastery. The monastery has existed since around the 11th century and remains an important religious centre in Ladakh. Rituals, prayer flags, and the sound of monks' horns keep the village from becoming a ruin abandoned in the Himalayas. Lamayuru is isolated by more than its mountain roads. It also seems separated from the rest of the world by the ancient landscape surrounding it. Above ground, Kuba Pedy looks like an unfinished settlement in the middle of the South Australian desert. Red earth, piles of excavated rock, and countless mine shafts make the landscape resemble a construction site on another planet. But most of the story lies beneath the surface. To escape the extreme heat of the outback, many residents carved their homes into the sandstone, creating dugouts that maintain a more stable temperature. Beneath the town are bedrooms, hotels, stores, churches, and even tunnels once excavated in the search for opal. Kuba Pedi emerged from a gemstone rush, then transformed its isolation into a way of life almost completely opposite to that of any other town. Here lights glow inside the earth. Above ground, the desert stretches so far that the town seems as though it should not exist. In Setenil de las Bodegas, people did not build their homes beside the cliffs. They placed entire houses beneath enormous slabs of rock. Along a gorge carved by the river, whitewashed homes shelter beneath natural stone overhangs, making many streets appear as though the mountain is pressing down upon them. At Cuevas del Sol and Cuevas de la Sombra, the rock is more than a backdrop. It becomes the ceiling, the roof, and a form of natural insulation, keeping interiors cooler in summer and warmer in winter. Above the town still stands the Torre del Homenage, a surviving remnant of the medieval fortress. Setenil is not far from the cities of Andalusia, but its structure gives it the feeling of a completely enclosed world. A village living beneath stone as though its residents chose to take shelter inside the mountain itself. Oymyakon does not need fortress walls to remain isolated. The cold has built an invisible boundary around this Siberian village. In 1933, the local weather station recorded minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a record low for a permanently inhabited settlement. During winter, frigid air becomes trapped in the valley, the ground remains locked in permafrost, and daylight appears only briefly. Pipes can freeze solid, engines may fail to restart if they are switched off for too long. Farming is nearly impossible, so fish and meat play a major role in the local diet. Yet homes, schools, and everyday routines continue. Oymyakon looks like a village sealed shut by winter, where people do not defeat the cold, but learn how to survive within it. Karimabad lies deep in the Hunza Valley, where small houses cling to the mountainside within an enormous ring of rock and snow. The road leading here winds beneath sheer cliffs, making the village feel hidden from the rest of Pakistan. Within this enclosure of stone and ice, irrigation channels carry mountain meltwater toward terraced fields, orchards, and clusters of homes crowded onto the slopes. Above the village, the ancient bolted fort still overlooks the rooftops packed along the hillside. Winter can make the roads even more difficult, while the surrounding peaks nearly seal off the entire horizon. Batad is not completely cut off from the world, but the terrain makes it resemble an oasis hidden between colossal mountain walls where green life rises from glacial water. La Rinconada sits at an elevation of roughly 16,700 feet in the Andes, so high that the air contains very little oxygen for the human body to function. Corrugated metal roofs spread beneath a glacier surrounded by mud, rock, and tunnels excavated for gold. It is considered the highest permanent settlement in the world, yet basic infrastructure has failed to keep pace with the town's growth. Many areas lack running water and proper sewage systems. The use of mercury to separate gold also contaminates water flowing from the melting ice. Even so, thousands of people continue to arrive, hoping to find precious metal inside the mountain. La Rinconada is not isolated because it lacks people. It is isolated by altitude, thin air, and a life dependent on a gold mine in a place where the human body was never designed to remain for long. Migingo is only a rocky outcrop measuring roughly half an acre in Lake Victoria, yet corrugated metal roofs cover almost every available space. There are no fields, no true streets, and almost no room left for expansion. Migingo is only a rocky outcrop measuring roughly half an acre in Lake Victoria, yet corrugated metal roofs cover almost every available space. There are no fields, no true streets, and almost no room left for expansion. Life revolves around boats returning with Nile perch, a valuable catch that has drawn fishermen from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania to crowd onto the island. The rich fishing grounds surrounding Migingo have also fueled disputes between Kenya and Uganda. From above, the settlement looks like a mass of metal floating in the water. Homes, shops, and fish docks are compressed together within an almost suffocatingly small area. Migingo is isolated, but it is far from quiet. It is a crowded fishing village where every step enters someone else's struggle to earn a living. Adamstown does not spread outward like a capital city. It is only a small cluster of houses on a mountainside above Bounty Bay, surrounded by the nearly empty South Pacific. Pitcairn has no airport, so every person and every shipment must arrive by sea before being transferred ashore in a small boat. From the landing, a steep road known as the Hill of Difficulty climbs toward the settlement, where only a few dozen residents live. Remarkably, many of them are descendants of the mutineers from the Bounty and the Polynesian companions who arrived here with them in 1790. The town square, church, post office, and museum form the tiny centre of the community. Beyond them lie cliffs, open ocean, and thousands of miles of water. Adamstown resembles the final dot on the map, where even one delayed ship can leave the entire island waiting. From roofs hanging on cliffs, to villages buried in ice, to communities quietly floating out at sea, every single one exists like a forgotten piece of the world. They are cut off by tall mountains, deep drops, dense jungles, and oceans that are never truly peaceful. Yet, in those very places seemingly unfit for humans, life just keeps going from generation to generation. Maybe what makes the world's most isolated villages look like they shouldn't exist isn't the distance, but how they defy every limit we've ever known. How about you? If you had to live your whole life in one of these spots, which village would you pick? Let us know down in the comments below. And out there are still plenty of impossible places quietly existing, waiting to be found at the very edges of the map. So make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our next journeys. Goodbye and see you next time.